the Iowa City Council Economic Development Committee meeting of Thursday, June 25th, 2017. We always like to kind of go around the room, so it helps with minutes to know who's here. So I want to start here, Ashley.
Ashley Monroe, Assistant City Manager.
Simon Andrew, Assistant to the City Manager.
Jeff Fruin, City Manager.
Wendy Ford, Economic Development.
Jim Throgmorton, Mayor of Iowa City.
Rockne Cole, City Council.
Eleanor Delp, City Attorney.
Susan Mims, City Council. Then can we start back in the audience as well?
Nick Winsley with Newman Munson Architects.
Nancy Bird, Iowa City Downtown District.
Tim Berman, Cruz Berman, LLC.
Martha Norbeck, Sea Wise Design.
Carol Bonsack, the Greater Iowa City Area Home Builders Association.
Tom Banta, ICAT.
Kate Moreland, ICAT.
Mark Ginsberg, Retail Business.
Michelle Galvin, Velvet Coat.
Rosanna Sada, Center for Worker Justice.
Charlie Eastham, Center for Worker Justice.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Number 2 is consider approval of minutes from the April 5th, 2017 meeting. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Cole, second by Throgmorton. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 3-0. Item number 3, consider approval of minutes from the April 14, 2017 Economic Development Committee meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Throgmorton, seconded by Cole. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. 3-0 passes. Thank you very much. All right, number 4 is the bulk of our meeting. Review the TIF policy refinements to date. We have a lot here, and I think we need to talk a little bit about the process and procedure that we want to go through, and particularly for me, in light of 2 recent memos that we have gotten that I think we need to take into account. One is from the Iowa City Downtown District that we got yesterday, and then one from Mayor Throgmorton this morning, which I've just had a minute or so to peruse. First of all, one of the things that we've really talked about in the last year and a half, in particular on council, I think we've done a lot of it, but even more so in the last year and a half, is public input on projects or processes or procedures or policies, et cetera. The downtown district is going to be potentially significantly influenced by any changes in our TIF policy. They have specifically in this memo asked for a sit-down with the Economic Development Committee. And personally, I think that would be very valuable before we finalize what our recommendations are to City Council. I think it might refine some of our thoughts and certainly make sure that we're taking those into account. So I would like to propose that. And then secondly, I find it difficult when we're working through things like this, and I think this is a pretty complex issue that we're trying to address with some potentially some very significant changes, to try to digest and give full consideration to items when we get them just at a meeting or, as late handouts or just before a meeting. And so I'm a little bit concerned, I guess, about how far we go with our discussion this morning in light of, one, trying to get the actual back and forth input from the public, which we got in focus groups up, early on, but at that point, we hadn't really formulated the kind of in much detail, we hadn't formulated much of where we were headed. So I think to get more of that public input at this point, when people are starting to see where the direction that it looks like we're headed, I think would be really valuable. And as I say, and I don't know, did we have another document that was given to us this morning or not?
We had some information come in from Martha Norbeck on LEAD and downtown, and then Jim's. No, there are 3 things.
Okay. So I guess I'm interested to hear what the other committee members think in terms of how far do we really want to go with the discussion this morning. And I guess I don't want to sit here and basically come to the conclusions and then say we're going to have a sit down with downtown property owners, downtown district, when in all appearances the decisions are already made. I think if we're going to do that, we need to do it sooner rather than later in terms of the level of discussion that we continue having.
Yeah.
I never oppose the idea of having a sit-down discussion with anybody. I do wonder about process, though. It's clear the downtown district folks have a special interest in this particular topic, but we're reviewing the TIF policy as a whole, so there are lots of other people who are potentially affected by it as well. I don't know that it's appropriate to have a sit-down with one important stakeholder, but no one else. So I'm not opposed to it, but I'm not sure that it's wise to narrow our discussion with only one important stakeholder. So I don't know. I'm curious about what you think, Jeff, what you think, Susan, what you think, Rockne.
I think that's a good point, Jeff. And I certainly, given the significance, the potential significance of the changes that we might adopt, I would have no problem with doing 2 or 3 or 4 if there's different groups that it's too many to bring together at one time, or with different focus in terms of their interests, to sit down and talk and discuss. So I mean, I would agree in terms of not being exclusive in terms of who we would sit down with. But I do think that the downtown district and downtown property owners certainly have a significant interest in how this goes forward. Because it certainly can affect property values, can affect, the ability for them to develop or redevelop properties, et cetera. So I think we certainly should do it with that group, but I'm certainly not opposed to either including other people in that one, or if we determine that in and of itself would be an hour or 2 discussion, then making it available to others who would actually like to come in and have a conversation instead of just sitting and listening to us discuss in a meeting.
Well, I think mildly concerned is just this question of time. I think we've engaged in a very thorough process, and I agree with you, Susan, that we are now getting to the point where we're actually getting details. So we certainly don't want to rush into any sort of final draft. That said, this process has been going on for nearly 9 months. I think that, given where developments occurred in the last couple years, I don't think height should have been a surprise. And to date, at least in terms of what I've seen on the radar, there's been very little actual written feedback. I mean, we got this particular proposal a day or 2 ago. If we want to have a little bit more time to do this, but I would really like to get a document to council relatively soon. I don't know what our time frame was, Jeff, in terms of what we were thinking of, but as I see that the TIF issues, we have agreement on virtually every issue except this question of the comp plan, downtown, and height. And then we have the lead issue. Am I correct that those are the 2 main issues really that?
Looks like to me.
So I would like to get, and I was hoping that, we've had this discussion of substantial weight and then the exceptions. I mean, if we wanted to get input on what those exceptions would be, reaching out to a wide variety of stakeholders, I guess I would be okay with that. But I really want to move forward as quickly as we can to get a proposal. We've been working on this for nearly a year. And I think in terms of that conversation to talk about what those exceptions would be and to get the input on that, but also the community as the whole. Because one thing I would differ with you a little bit on, Susan, I think obviously incredibly important stakeholders in the downtown district, but in my view, no more than anyone who lives on the edge of town as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's everyone's downtown. And as it pertains to the TIF policy, it's everyone's tax dollars in terms of, TIF loans or rebates. So that's what I would like to see. If we want to have a little bit of time, but I'd really like to move forward getting a draft to council. And then, given the fact we're not even developing an ordinance, although I wouldn't like to change it as soon as we get it, adopted, this is a policy that we could tweak from time to time, is my understanding, right? I mean, so if we need to tweak it a little bit later, I'd certainly be open to that. Is sort of my thought process.
Eleanor, when a draft or whatever goes to the council, it would be in the form of a resolution, would it not? Not an ordinance?
Right.
So there'd be one reading, maybe deferral on action, and we could have a public hearing, more than one public hearing, right?
We could.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Rockne has said, because we've talked with, had focus group interviews with, 65 people, including members of the Downtown Association, a substantial number, I think. And we've been doing this for 9 months or so. It's been on television. we've been following a pretty rigorous process. So I think we probably do need to get as much of a draft done today as we can get done. The issues really have to do partly with LEED and more importantly, I think, with the downtown plan and height and so on. I think we need to discuss those today. We may come to some general agreement about them. I don't know because we haven't had the discussion. And try to move ahead because we have engaged in a thorough process.
I'm then fine if that's what the two of you want. I am concerned that we're putting off some very valuable public input given that there's a lot more detail now. I think the focus groups, were worthwhile at the beginning to get some general input, but I think it was very difficult at that point in time for people to give the kind of input that they would give at this point in time when now they see where this is actually headed. And so I think to not have that opportunity when they can really see more of the details, I think is a problem. And I think it ends up leading to a policy that is not going to be as well accepted by the community and particularly by those who are in fact more affected by it. And while I agree, Rockne, the downtown is everybody's downtown and the TIF dollars are tax dollars, and we want to have development and redevelopment done in a way that is I would say in general acceptable by everybody. That's not always going to be the case. I mean, there's people who hate Plaza Towers, there's people who hate Park at 201, there's people who didn't want the Chauncey to go up, and you have the other people on the other side that absolutely love those buildings and think that they add a great, variety and character to the downtown. So not every development is going to be accepted by everybody. But also I think it's incredibly important when we think about economic development in this community, who is doing that economic development, who is taking the risk, who is putting the money in. And our goal here is obviously within certain guidelines to further that. And while it's important that people on, the periphery of the downtown or living out, wherever in Iowa City, but not in the downtown area, have some input and have a downtown that they're proud of and want to be a part of, they also are not the ones who have put the time, the money, the sweat, the emotion, and the risk on the line to help make our downtown what it is. And so I think giving that additional opportunity to those people who are in that position, given where we are in this process, really makes sense. I think if we go through pretty much this discussion today and get things finalized, if I were sitting there saying, what's the point in even talking to them later, they've already made up their mind.
One point, just to make, you're a body of three, but you still have to abide by public meeting laws and rules. So a listening post is essentially an EDC meeting. It's just a regularly scheduled meeting, and I don't know that you'd set a meeting just for one stakeholder group. It would be a listening post for anybody that was interested. And you could do 2 or 3 of them and market them differently or target people to come. But if you're going to do a public comment period at an official meeting, it should be open to anybody from the public.
Okay.
I think we need to make as many decisions as we can today. I think the 2 key issues have already been clearly stated. We should discuss them. If we can decide one or both of them today, we should do it. If we can't, the discussion itself is being overheard and watched. I would eagerly solicit input from the people who observe the discussion, have strong feelings about it, strong ideas about it. They can share them with us. And if that's about a topic that we haven't decided upon today, we can take the feedback they give us into account when we meet next time. That said, I do think we need to get off the dime. We've been doing this for a long time, and we need to fish or cut bait. And that's what we're here for.
How do you define making a decision today?
I'll give staff clear guidance about this, about whether we agree with the recommendations.
So is clear guidance unanimous, or is it 2 to 1?
Oh, well, if it's unanimous, that's perfect. If it's
And
not.
if it's not, then is that
it's
a,
not-
that, I mean, that's legitimately is my question, honestly, because as we've talked before, you know that I have some disagreement, at least with you, Jim, and maybe with you, Rockne, on the height issue. And so that's my question. When you say, make a decision today on what we can, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just,
Yeah,
what do you
yeah.
mean by making a decision?
Well, I think there are three people here in majority rules.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too is, I guess I would like to start with the TIF, or not with the lead discussion, because I think that's something that would be much easier to resolve today, and I think we can make substantial progress on the height as well, is my thought.
All right, should we start through the document then? Let's take a look. We've got,
Okay. You want me to go ahead?
yeah, that's fine.
Wendy,
Okay.
if you could be brief, that would be very helpful, because we have an hour-long period to
Right.
discuss.
So our suggestion would be to set up the policies using the strategic planning priorities that you set forth a year and a half ago or so as the basis for being considered for TIF. Then we have these several subject areas, the first one in the memo of which is sustainability. And we've discussed having buildings be required to be LEED Silver certified. Then a couple of months ago, we had a suggestion from one of the local architects here who specializes in LEED building that perhaps we ought to also require 8 additional LEED points to be achieved in energy efficiency, from the energy efficiency category in the LEED scoring. That primarily because in the downtown area, buildings are more likely to be able to achieve LEED Silver just by default of being downtown and doing a few putting a few sustainable features in. So since the last meeting, staff met with Martha Norbeck, the architect who had suggested that addition, and 2 other local architects who also practice in LEED. And we were able to answer some questions that you see in your memo, or get some clarity on some of the questions from the memo. The first being, why 8 points, and should there be fewer or more? It generally seemed, after talking to all 3 architects, that 8 points from energy efficiency category was doable. There had been some concern about whether or not requiring 8 points in that category might take away possible points achieved in other categories. And as you know, LEED is a fairly holistic sustainability program that not only requires your due diligence and sustainable practices in energy efficiency, but also green and open space and light and working conditions and all sorts of things. And one of our concerns was that perhaps requiring 8 points in energy efficiency would detract from points that could be achieved in some of those other very valuable categories as well. Long story short, it appears 8 points is doable, but the staff feels that and recommends that that the 8 extra points not be required, that it be a nice thing you could do, but because LEED is a nationally recognized standard and is already set up and operating as it does, that requiring LEED Silver certification would be the way to go. And if a developer wanted to achieve more points or make additional sustainability features in their project, so be it. That'd be all the better, all the more compelling of a project. We also looked into and tried to find out how expensive it would be for developers to implement the savings in, or to implement the programs or the energy efficiency programs to achieve those points. And essentially we learned that the greater efficient operation systems for a building pay for themselves within 5 to 7 years or so. And then lastly, we looked at, we tried to determine the costs of participating in a LEED certification program at all. And There aren't any hard and fast numbers, and as it says in the memo, the short answer is it depends on the project, really, where it is, exactly what kinds of packages of windows, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and et cetera, are used in the building. But we found a common, fairly common note as LEED Silver costing about an additional 2% more for a building. Let's see here. And we also have some additional information on what LEED is and some information as to the costs of that was provided by Martha today, and I'll pass that around here in a little bit. Essentially, staff is recommending that the LEED Silver certification would be appropriate, but would not recommend the additional 8 points at this time.
Comments from committee?
Jim, do you
Well,
want
first of all, I strongly think our TIF policy should help us achieve our carbon emission reduction goals. If there's a better way of accomplishing that objective than going the LEED route, I'd be eager to hear it, but I'm not aware of a better way. So I support stating that new residential mixed-use projects in the City University Project 1 area shall be LEED Silver certified, but I also think the 8 points in the energy and atmosphere category would be appropriate. But I look forward to hearing what y'all have to say.
I would agree, Jim. I think for me, I support the silver as well as the +8. The key language for me is this is a reasonable stretch goal, which I think is precisely the purpose of what our TIF policy is. I think one of the hardest issues with climate change is ensuring that the people that are actually involved in the mitigation are actually able to capture the market value of what they're doing. Well, that's extraordinarily difficult to do in this particular case. Certainly you can do it with respect to, if you have any lower energy bills, but sometimes you can't. And I think that's precisely the purpose of TIF, is to assist developers to do something they otherwise would not be able to do. So it does appear to be doable. It's been vetted by 3 separate architects, and so I would support the silver +8.
Can I make 2 clarifications real quick and just make sure that we're on the same page? Staff is commenting on this only for the City University
Yes.
urban renewal area.
Understand that.
And
To
2,
be clear about that, that includes riverfront crossings.
downtown and riverfront crossings. And then 2, I don't think the 8 points are addition to a baseline LEED certification. It's still, you have to achieve LEED Silver, and within that qualification, you have to have 8 points in this category. So it's not above and beyond, but it's a core component to that LEED Silver certification. Just want to make.
I know you have something to say, Susan, but I need some clarification also. I did not have a chance to read what Martha provided us with, so I don't know if it would alter my
None of us
views
have
at all.
seen it, so.
There's 2 sheets.
Well, I won't have time to read it now either, so thanks.
Go ahead and take one if you want.
So I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, it just came in a few minutes
Yeah.
before the meeting.
As I stated last time, I think LEED Silver is a good way to go, but I would like to see it done as a preferred, not a required for TIF. I think it potentially locks us in situations where there may be other strong community benefits that for whatever reason silver is not as readily achievable, or the cost is such that when you're looking at other amenities, the trade-off in those costs, we might decide that those, in that particular case, that those other amenities are just as or more important than the LEED certification on that particular project. As I said, in general, reducing the carbon emissions, more energy efficient, totally supportive of those goals. But I would rather see it as a preferred or highly preferred indicated in the TIF policy. And while we talked before, and not having had a chance to look at the stuff that's come in today, was generally, maybe supportive of this idea of the making sure that at least 8 points are coming from that energy category. having read staff's stuff, a lot of people worked a long time and really hard on developing these LEED certifications and looking at it from a very, holistic point of view. And so without having a chance to look at this additional information, at this point, I'm not necessarily comfortable saying that silver certification would also have to have those 8 points out of that one area. I think there's a lot of work that was put into developing those that made a lot of sense to a lot of people with a lot more expertise. And again, without having a chance to look at this latest information. So my position, I would like to see it preferred, not required. And at this point, at least, not require the 8 points out of that particular energy efficiency category. So.
Well, when we move ahead with this, we can certainly solicit public comment about that. And again, if anybody's watching this or overhearing it, I'd be eager to hear their views about it.
Any other comments then on the LEED silver?
Did we get direction on preferred versus required? I mean, just for record purposes, I would like it to be required, and I would like the 8 of the silver.
Me too.
8 points.
Got it.
Anything else? Okay. All right, moving on to the downtown building heights.
Well, we incorporated in the memo Mr. Mayor Throgmorton's request that substantial weight will be given to a project seeking TIF within the desired heights shown on the downtown and riverfront crossings master plan's building height map, which is shown on page 106 and also included on page 106 of that plan, and then also as an exhibit in today's memo. Staff is recommending that you maintain some flexibility in the height policy, and that you also declare the circumstances under which you would consider going higher. Any further clarification on that?
Yeah, okay, so as the committee members and staff know, I distributed a memo about this, 45 minutes ago.
I got it when I walked in the
Yeah,
room,
it's, and I didn't have time to write it until this morning. So I want to distribute this to people who might be interested. There might be enough copies, and if you could send that over that way, that'd be good. So it's a page and a half memo, but I don't need to read all of it because I've read several parts of this, or a substantial part of it, several times before in committee meetings. So I think the staff statement of the policy needs to be refined. I mean, it is consistent with our discussion from our last meeting, but I'm suggesting I think it needs to be refined. I strongly believe that our TIF policy should explicitly state the following. And this is, language I came up with, so I know it could be refined as well. And I make an effort to emphasize that what I'm going to be saying here focuses on the downtown portion of the downtown and riverfront crossings area, not the riverfront crossings part of it. And there's there are reasons for that I could explain. So to be considered for TIF support in the downtown portion of the City University Project 1 area, all applications for support must explicitly indicate how the proposed project will help fulfill the overall ambition of the downtown portion of the downtown riverfront crossings plan, namely, quote, to preserve and enhance the historic buildings and character of downtown while encouraging appropriate infill development with a mix of building uses. That should be an unquote, and that comes from page 18. As guidance about how their projects can best help fulfill the comprehensive plan's ambitions for the downtown, applicants must carefully address in their applications the following guidelines, which can be found on page 56 of the plan. And the next paragraph and bulleted points are ones that I have read, I don't know, at least twice, maybe 3 times in our committee meetings, so I don't want to repeat them right now. And then leaping to the next to last paragraph, applicants must also strive to ensure that their proposed projects, should be S, are consistent with the building height map shown on page 106 of the plan. Final paragraph, deviations from the aforementioned guidelines and building height map may be considered if the applicant demonstrates that the proposed building and uses will preserve and enhance the character of downtown by materially contributing to the preservation and enhancement of adjacent or nearby historic structures. So what I tried to do with this memo is refine what the staff had come back to us with, and in particular to respond to the question you asked about, what would warrant a deviation from the building height map and so on. So I'm sorry I wasn't able to get this to you before, 12 months ago or whatever it was, but we live complicated lives. So there's that.
Well, I'd be happy to comment on that. And, I think although you just got it into the meeting 30 to 45 minutes before, I mean, we've been talking about the comprehensive plan for a significant period of time. And so these particular standards have not just been pulled out of thin air, they've actually been pulled out of the existing comprehensive plan that we already have in place. I think that they provide very clear direction in terms of what parts of the comprehensive plan that we're going to place significant weight upon. And so while you just submitted this 30 minutes ago, I think this has been an ongoing conversation that we've had for a substantial period of time. And I guess this whole issue of the comprehensive plan and the need for clarity, first of all, the comprehensive plan was done, as I understand it, with the support of professional consultants that are experts in urban design, also with a lot of community input, and also would have been ultimately ratified by the previous city council. So this isn't a document that just sort of comes out of nowhere. It's a very thoughtfully designed document that I feel does capture in many respects not only the character of the existing downtown, but it provides a roadmap for us to assess future development going forward. And I think that one of the things we've seen in terms of the feedback we've gotten from the downtown district, as well as the need for, as well from various developers, is the need for clarity. And I understand that. And I think that this particular language does provide the clarity. So I think that, at least insofar as it's stated, I think in terms of just reemphasizing a document that's already been on the books for a significant period of time, this should come as no surprise. Now, I want to just publicly state, as to the exceptions, my mind has not been made up in terms of what the proposed exceptions would be. Jim identifies that it has to materially contribute and enhance preservation of historic structures. I think that's certainly something that's important to me, but I guess my mind is not totally made up, and to the extent that there's desire for a future conversation, I'd certainly be willing to have that. But my overarching goal is that any deviation, the developer of the proposed project should explicitly declare how the deviation is going to benefit the community. We've talked a lot about amenities and these sorts of things in terms of enhancing the project itself, but that really has to be the focus, at least in my view, as a starting point for that discussion. Now, it may be that people just won't be able to identify those. I'm thinking 1 or 2 or 3 criteria that we can identify. They'll be clearly stated that we would be able to then put in the document. And the second part of it is to get, anytime a deviation is sought, that it should happen as early as possible, so there's not any surprises in terms of something that is out of character with the downtown, and so the community has maximum opportunity to weigh in. But I think that this provides the need for clarity. I think it's based upon an existing document, and I think it really does 2 things. It both preserves what we like, but it offers a roadmap going forward. But again, I'm open to having that discussion, and so what I would like to do is adopt this language, or at least in the relatively near future, move forward with getting a proposal, hopefully to the council as a whole, get an adopted policy, and then again, if we need to amend the resolution at some point in the future and there are compelling reasons provided for a justification, I'm willing to keep an open mind on that. But I think now this really achieves what we'd like to achieve.
My concern when I look at this, the comprehensive plan, as we've talked many times, is an aspirational document in terms of how, how we would like things to look potentially, but is not an ordinance, it's not the law, et cetera. It's what we would kind of like to see going forward is aspirational. I have significant concerns with the height map that is in the document. I've got concerns, I guess what I would really like to see before moving forward with this is this height map, but also to see the current zoning of every single piece of property in this downtown area and see the current heights. And I know some of this is current based on the color coding in here. I mean, I know certain ones are that way where we've got tall buildings in the middle of blocks. It's because they're already existing, not because that's what the comprehensive plan would have suggested. But maybe it's just my background, okay? And my brain, I'm an engineer by education, okay? So I'm kind of think and wired in that way. I read this, and to me, it does not give a whole lot of clarity. It is still very vague and very aspirational in terms of, preserving and enhancing historic buildings, fine. What does it mean to 10 different people? What is the character of downtown? Okay. Again, as I said earlier, there are people who, at the time and to this day, if they had their choice, we wouldn't have anything higher in downtown than 4 or 5 stories, anything that's already existing. Things like the Chauncey, Park at 201, would not have that opportunity to exist. They see those as very damaging to the character of downtown. So whose vision of the character of downtown are we looking at as, and I'm trying to put myself in the shoes for a moment of staff, as somebody, as a developer is coming forward with a project, and how they would go about, analyzing that, other than sitting there and thinking, at this point in time, who do I have on council and what's likely to make it through council? So to me, a policy should not be written where staff is going to be sitting there right now saying, don't even bother to come forward because I don't think this project will make it through this particular council. And at some other point in time, they look at a policy, whether it's this or any other policy, say, oh yeah, I think that project or that thing you want to do would work under the same policy, but we have a council that has a different political makeup and different vision, et cetera. To me, if you've got that much flexibility in the policy, I'm not sure that you have a policy that is meaningful enough to really get at what is going to be helpful to staff and to the developers as they're going forward. I asked the question last time and didn't really get clarification. What do we really mean by, and it's in the comp plan, what do we mean by corner locations should be reserved for taller buildings? Taller, are we saying 15 stories if FAA allows it? Are we saying, I think I asked the question, and Jim, you said taller than what's there. I mean, so I don't know if in your mind that still means only a 4 or 5 story building on a particular corner. So to me it's not, and again, maybe it's just my engineering brain. This isn't clear. If I were a developer, I would look at this and say, I still really don't know what this policy means, other than I need to look at it through the eyes of the people that are sitting on the council and who will vote on it. And by listening to what they say in public and what they voted on in other things, that gives me an idea whether they would consider my project acceptable or not. So
my feedback is on that, Susan. As I recall, in the last year, there's been at least 3 different occasions when developer had raised question about whether something would go through council, at least as far as I can remember. And when they had those questions, and Jeff wasn't adequately sure, whether it would go through council, they brought it to us in a work session. And then we gave them feedback and direction as to what we'd like to see. And then in response to that, they took into consideration that feedback and they moved forward. I can think of at least probably 2 or 3 times where that's happened. Projects went forward. So.
Which one, can you, and I'm not trying to be difficult, I just don't remember. What?
Jesse Allen right behind here, right?
Yeah.
That was January of 2016. There's another project that is going to come before us in essentially a month, which we expect is going to happen, that similar concerns were expressed. So this notion that there's this impenetrable sort of barrier of ambiguity, I'm just not seeing it. Not only theoretically, but actually in practice, we've seen situations where there was concern about what council would do, and they came to us in a work session. So I guess I would say to the community as a whole, or anyone who's listening, if you have a project and there's some ambiguity about whether you think it's going to go through and you don't feel comfortable without council assurance, bring it to us to a work session. We've done it in the past. And the project moved forward. So I'm just not seeing that it's that big a problem. And my view is I understand the need for confidentiality and privacy in terms of development projects, but with a public process, it's hard to have that, right? And so that's just sort of the nature of partnering with the city on a particular project, is that it has to be open.
But see, I think in that confidentiality, to me, you miss an issue in that I think Jesse Allen's was a totally aberration in terms of its city property. A huge project right here and the preservation of the church, et cetera. I think we have situations where that confidentiality is, if you have somebody who's making a property purchase offer, but it's contingent, they are not going to want that information out in the public. Those kinds of confidentiality issues are incredibly important to those folks until they get much further along in the process. And so they're not necessarily going to be able to come to council and have those kinds of discussions in an open forum. And I know you mentioned 2 or 3, you've said Jesse, so I don't know what the other ones are that we've.
Forest View.
Pardon?
Forest
View, Hieronymus Square, that's 3. So, those have been ones that have gone through. And I think in terms of if anyone's buying a property with the expectation that they're going to get TIF, I think that's an unreasonable expectation if they're buying it for that purpose. And I think right now, we can't prevent anyone from building as tall as they want in CB10. Is my position.
Yeah, so let me toss in a couple other points. With regard to, I've forgotten your exact language, Susan, but imprecision of what I circulated, or ambiguity and so on. I think, in fact, it gives greater precision than is currently the situation. Currently, the situation is that a developer could come in and just start negotiating with the staff on the basis of a whole bunch of stuff that could be assembled, disassembled, moved around, shifted around. If that isn't extremely flexible and ambiguous, I don't know what is. So this provides greater precision. So, and then with regard to the aspirational quality of the comprehensive plan, I know that term's been used a lot, and I got to tell you, I don't think very highly of the term. It is dismissive of the comprehensive plan and its ultimate purpose and the process by which it was developed. It may be legally aspirational, but the fact that it's aspirational, in fact, is profoundly important. It indicates what the people of this city and the city council have, after a full process, decided is the general direction that they want the downtown or the downtown and riverfront crossings district or the city as a whole to go. Sure, it's an aspiration, but it's meaningful. And then beyond that, tools like zoning, like economic development policies and the like, are intended to, if you will, implement or carry out or fulfill the comprehensive plan. That's the purpose of those things. So it's a mistake to put zoning or some other specific policy above the comprehensive plan and say the comprehensive plan is merely aspirational. and this other stuff is more important. So I think it is really valuable to say to developers, property owners, and others that this is what the comprehensive plan calls for. It's what the people of this city want. Now, please do come forward with projects, with proposals, but have that in mind when you do it. And then, when you think about your own project, consider the guidelines that appear on page, what is this, page whatever, page
56.
Page 56 of the Downtown Riverfront Crossings Plan. About, there's this list of, 5, 6 things, like new development should be located on sites that do not contain historic buildings, and so on. So think about those things. And when you put that proposal together, have it influenced by those components. And then look at the map. Look at the building height map. Try to follow it. And then, this is, I think, a huge compromise on the part of me and other people. Deviations from the map and et cetera are permitted. Deviations are possible, but you got to justify them. You've got to have a good rationale for deviating. So that's my own way about that.
Jeff, you want to comment?
Yeah, I just want to weigh in on a couple of the criteria here, and I think we've, in the course of these meetings and some of the council meeting issues that we've had, we've kind of beat the comp plan issue to death, and I won't go back there, but I still think there's some challenges with using comp plan language in a policy. But as I look at these bullet points that are in your memo, Mayor, that you took from page 56 of the plan, and if I heard you correctly, to start with the building height map, you're really just talking about the downtown portion of that, not the riverfront crossings. Okay, so new development should be located on sites that do not contain historic buildings. Our urban renewal plan already precludes us from any project that would alter a historic property. So that one doesn't carry a whole lot of meaning because there's already a whole lot of, there's protection in our urban renewal plan for those historic structures. Ground floor retail, not blank walls, should be on street frontages in the city plaza. That's built into our zoning code standards and our design review process. Upper floors should contain office, commercial, and residential uses. I'm not sure really what other uses could be on those upper floors, but that kind of covers the gamut. So those, and then buildings should be built to the property line. We require that, again, with the CB10 zoning downtown. So those first few bullets, I would say there's already adequate protections in the downtown area for those. I don't know that we need to specifically call them out. We could, but those are, again, protected in other parts of city code or the urban renewal plan. The next one, obviously, is the big one that gets with the building heights. And then on the back section, there's 2 remaining points. Taller buildings should have a lower base. I think that is also covered in the zoning code. There gets to be a design review component that's a little tricky, and this whole feeling contextual with the downtown is difficult for us, at least at the staff level, to judge. Initially, I think you'd have to have something where the council or the applicant would have to come to council and say, is this contextual? Because I think we've had some disagreements on what that might be. And then again, the last point is the parking located both on street and behind storefronts in the downtown. The way in which we manage that private parking, you're not going to have surface parking lots in that immediate downtown area. So some of this stuff I just wanted to point out, is already covered. When it gets into the historic character and historic preservation, from staff standpoint, the urban renewal plan does everything you need there, because it's not just protecting historic buildings, it's protecting buildings that are eligible to be listed on the National Register. So it really gets at this building height issue. And that's where I think the clarity is helpful. And if that's just the map, and the map is the map, that's good. You've got some language here on deviations. The way that that's worded right now, I think that would have to come to council at a pretty early stage in the development process to see if you would want to allow a deviation from the map. And some developers are willing to do that. Some developers aren't willing to do that. That's just the reality of it.
I would have a question, and I don't know how this map was developed, but with, quote, taller buildings on the corners. And again, I'm totally uncomfortable with the fact that we don't have a definition of what taller means. I look, as a specific example, I look at the corner of Lynn and College where Mearden Supel Downer Law Office is, currently a one-story building, okay? It's shaded on here as a 4 to 6 level, if my reading of colors is right.
Yeah.
Is a 4 to 6, why is that only 6-story when you go other corners and they're 7 to 15? I mean, what's the logic?
I think that's a reasonable question. What I do know is that the staff presented us with this draft plan back in 2013, and the draft plan contained this map, and we approved it. That's what I do know. So I think maybe some discussions could be held about the wisdom of the current map. I don't have any objection to that, but there was some thinking underlying the map's recommendation.
Right,
the staff's recommendation.
Yeah, and what
about
I
the
would say,
map.
when you take something like a comprehensive plan, as long and complicated as that document is, I think inevitably you have people, on council who vote for it, including myself, who don't necessarily agree with every single item in it. And we probably don't even get to the point of discussing every item that people might agree or disagree within it, because it is so long and complicated. But I have some real significant concerns with how this map, if this is going to be the de facto rule of height going forward for TIF, I think this map needs some serious review. And like I said, I would like to see every single one of these properties and what their current zoning is as well, because I think the other issue that you no, I won't even go there.
But isn't the current zoning for all those properties CB10 with historic landmark overlay on some
I don't
of
know.
them?
That's why I'm asking.
My guess is yes. You'd have a couple publicly zoned properties, but CB10 would cover this whole area.
Public properties, right?
Well, I think, I would actually have to talk to the developers of the plan to see why they had the height recommendations that they did. The only thing what I would say is one of my guesses would be, is that they don't want a situation where you have, right now you have CB10, which means you could have unlimited height, that you don't want essentially a mix of structures with 15-story structures. And so sort of a mix of heights, mix of uses. That would be my thought in terms of why they did it the way that they did.
But again, excuse me for interrupting, Rodney, but it says taller on the corners.
Yeah.
Again,
I don't
that's
think
a
that's
huge,
so ambiguous. If
Well,
one's-
I think it's
for
incredibly
downtown Iowa
ambiguous.
City, as it presently is, a 6-story building on the corner of College and Lynn is taller. It's definitely taller.
Well,
So-
a 2-story building where Mearden Supel Downer is now is taller. I mean, that's not giving developers guidance, in my opinion. If it's CB10, and under CB10, you've got unlimited height other than basically what our FAA restrictions would be. And we're saying that based on the comp plan, taller buildings on the corners, then based on a single map, we're going to say, oh, well, wait a minute, this one on that particular corner, only says 6 stories. Why? I mean-
I think probably. I don't know this, and it'd be interesting to talk with our staff more carefully about it. My guess is it's an urban design-based recommendation, because there is a profession called urban design, and I think they probably had that in mind when they were suggesting taller buildings on the corners. Now, did they want to say 15 stories on every corner? Obviously not, and that
No.
was influenced by the market analysis that had preceded development of the comprehensive plan back in 2013.
Well, I think Jeff has made some really good points on, I think any policy it doesn't make sense to put things into the policy that we don't need and that are covered by other things, assuming, Jeff, with those other things, like in the urban renewal and with the zoning, do you see issues there where those could get changed and thus then negatively impact, or then this policy doesn't have the same impact that the intent is?
Yeah,
So does the redundancy make sense in terms of that protection or not?
I don't think so. I think, to me, the zoning code and the urban renewal plan, both of which could be changed by council, would I don't say carry more weight's not the right word, but the council would actively have to change the zoning language or do an amendment to the urban renewal plan, both of which are very public processes to strip these items out.
So let me make a suggestion on these points, because Jeff makes good points with regard to those bulleted items. I think they still are valuable in the sense that they give a potential applicant a checklist that relates back to the comprehensive plan. So perhaps for each of these points, they could have a subsequent reference to the particular part of the zoning code or a particular part of, the urban renewal plan, et cetera, that would tell the developer where to go to get the precision about each of the elements.
They're probably actually going to be starting with those other items first, aren't they? Because, TIF isn't going to be the first thing that they're looking at as they're designing. They're going to be looking at, what is the urban renewal plan? You guys have a better idea of kind of the order in which they're talking to you and going through documents and restrictions and stuff.
Yeah, I think anybody that's either acquired property or is looking at acquired property is not necessarily starting with the TIF question. They look at it, they look at the current zoning, they've got a vision for that property, and then it takes some effort and some investment on their part to start to develop a pro forma to figure out what's possible, and then they say, okay, we need city help or we don't need city help.
Sure, so they do that homework, but it's also would also be a public document, and having these kinds of bulleted items would provide greater clarity for any member of the public who is looking at our TIF policy and asking themselves, so what are they going to approve, what are they going to disapprove? It doesn't give them final, conclusive conclusions, but it gives them
Well, and I think the other part about the redundancy is that, staff has an incredible knowledge of the comprehensive plan and all of the pertinent documents. But I think Jim brings up a good point. When we're talking about communicating to the public in terms of council's decision-making as well as staff's decision-making process, to have it in an easily accessible format where they can go through and they can read those. And I think part of the reason that at least I became aware of the page 56 language was the Lynn Street project. We had the 14-story. As I went through that particular development as it was originally proposed, it didn't seem to in any way, as I could tell, really meet many of the criteria that were established here. And that's what generated that. So that's at least one major project in which there did appear to be some ambiguity, at least based upon some of the past policies that the council had. So I think having this, to the extent it's somewhat redundant, obviously normally you don't like redundancy in documents, but we're not adding pages and pages of additional material to this. It's relatively modest. And I think what this will do is point to those parts that, in my view, are sufficiently clear to give the guidance while allowing staff the flexibility. And I would imagine, too, that these particular standards, were most likely developed by architects, that were consulting with the development company that put it together. I'm assuming. Yeah. They just didn't pick them out of anywhere.
Right.
Or are they just community members throwing them, randomly?
No, but I would say when the folks that do the comp plan, when you write a comp plan, you're not writing a regulatory document, so the language
That's right.
isn't, you don't write in a regulatory fashion. It is more of that visionary type of writing. So that's one point, and that's, I'm not saying right or wrong on anything, Rockne, but to use the 7 South Lynn project that you mentioned, I think reasonable people can come to different conclusions on whether that meets the comp plan, because I can look at those bullet points and say, it's not it does not contain a historic building, it has an active ground floor retail, it has upper floors that contain residential and commercial, it was built to the property line, it doesn't meet that last building or that last point, well, it's technically not even a corner location, but obviously building heights was the thing that caught that project up. It's not tall on a corner, and the parking was located off-street in that case. So when staff presented that taller concept and we supported that, we did feel it met the comp plan, and obviously there was disagreement, and that's okay. That's what we're trying to avoid going through this process where we might think it's compatible, but then there's a key provision or two that council members, a majority of council members don't feel it's compatible with. And I think anytime you're dealing with, in the world of comp plans, you're subjecting yourself to that possibility.
If I one brief thing, what I think we definitely need to do is try to be a little more precise about what would justify deviations.
Yeah.
I mean, you alluded to that, Rockne. So we're not in a position to have a final, even if it's a 2-1 vote, we're not in a position to have a final recommendation coming out of this discussion. But I think it's been a very fruitful discussion. But we do need to revisit that particular point. So maybe if the staff's willing, the staff could come back to us with a refined version of what I provided here. And we could invite the public to respond to it, and we could try to identify particular features that would justify deviations.
Would it be helpful, I'm sorry,
go ahead.
would it be helpful if we provided, we can narrow in this height map, but if we were to essentially crosshatch or black out the properties that are historic or eligible, so you could see, because there's a significant number of these projects that, or these properties that, right off the bat, there's no TIF involved unless it's a historic preservation project.
Yeah.
I think that may help ease, I guess, just better understand the conditions in which TIF would operate, and we could do that. I think it'd be meaningful.
And to have it a full-page map would be nice.
Yeah, that would be
A little bit bigger.
helpful.
Okay. Well, we're just about out of time. I would just make one last point. I would not include the bullets that are redundant with our other documents, but it sounds like Rockne and Jim both want to keep those in there. I just wouldn't do it. And again, I'm not comfortable with this whole taller building thing in the corners. I still don't think I think we're limiting in certain areas and not totally definitive on what taller means other than the map, which I'm not comfortable with. So with that, any final comments before we adjourn? I guess the other comment I would like to make is I would be very interested in making our next meeting, or at least the first 45 minutes or hour of our next meeting, an opportunity to engage in dialogue with members of the public before we continue on with any discussion from the committee. Are people amenable to that?
Maybe. I have a different recommendation for today. Could we extend this meeting? We have 15 minutes. I think we could finish the remainder of this document.
I cannot. I need to get some things ready for 12:30
Okay,
meetings.
then
so.
I want us to finish the remainder of the document. That's my recommendation. And so if we wait another month to come back to this, I want to go through the rest of that so that's clear.
And then have a meeting with the public?
Yeah, I have no, like I said earlier, I have no opposition whatsoever to getting input from members of the public.
Can I clarify just what staff's responsibilities are going forward? So We're going to key in on the mayor's language here, perhaps refine it slightly, but keep the spirit of what you've presented here. And you're looking for some actual policy language at this point for the building height piece. We'll actually start working on the entire policy now that we've gotten direction on some other items as well.
And exceptions.
Yeah. And then
Deviations, whatever.
we'll provide the map to you, an updated map.
And just to clarify, Jim, when you're talking about the remainder of the document, were you talking about, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I mean, the other portions of the staff memo? Because I thought we'd already gone through that, and that was.
I support staff's recommendations on every one of those.
I was going to say, I do too, and I thought maybe even Susan did.
I
New
think,
language in the.
There was some new, it didn't, maybe a little bit more clarity.
The social justice piece was some actual contract language that.
Yeah, which I seem to be really
Okay.
good.
Yeah,
Okay.
I supported that as well.
Okay. Then I think we'll just assume staff's recommendation on the rest of the items. We'll start drafting the policy, and when we set the next meeting, we'll at least have some policy language for you to consider on the building height piece.
And then to focus in on the factors for the deviation.
Right.
okay. Anything else quick from staff?
I would like to, make a request. I have no idea what staff people were involved in development of the comprehensive plan. I could guess, but I don't know for sure. And I don't want to point them out, but I'd be curious to get some insight, at least indirectly. Maybe you could provide insight for them about the rationale concerning the map, and the building height map.
Anything from staff? I'd wanted to give you time to talk about the business.
Building
program.
business basics.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
We had a great turnout Saturday at Kirkwood Community College for a program we called Building Business Basics, to which 60 people attended. It was a program designed to give people the bare minimums or the basics to begin considering the writing of a business plan for their own business. And we had 5 breakout sessions. Everybody rotated classrooms and went to all 5. Then we had a networking session at the end. It was really successful.
Yeah, it was a great event.
Got a lot of good feedback.
Anything else from staff? Anything from committee?
No.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 We are adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the members of the audience for coming.